Welcome to the 91st episode of the Hail Married podcast. I'm A Toves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're back to review our first ranked win over number 25 Memphis. Let's get started. What were your thoughts on this game?
Well, let's start out with Memphis first. I teased before in prior pods. I said they're not as good as they appear to be, and even last week when we were doing our preview, I said the same thing. They're not as good as you think they are. They're not as buttoned up. There's just something about them, and we were right. Now we weren't right about our predictions.
Fortunately.
Which, hey, we'll take, right? But we also didn't know what UTSA would show up, and
Right.
we'll get into that in a little bit. But can we talk Memphis here? I don't understand what it is, this love of Memphis as a potential college football playoff contender, because when you watched them out there, was there anything that told you this is an AAC contender and a college playoff contender?
Well, I think if you look at the team on paper, that's really where it comes from, more so than from what you see on the field.
Sure.
Because, again, on paper, you have a very veteran team. A lot of these guys have played together for a long time. You have a 4-year starting quarterback in Seth Hennigan. You expect that you're going to have a very good, buttoned up, team. And then when you see them play, you see these mistakes, you see these, one possession games or come from behind victories. And it's a different story than I think what you think you should see based on, just their roster alone. And then you hear all this about NIL, and we'll talk more about that. But, that was the narrative all throughout the week, right? How much NIL dollars they have in comparison to other G5 programs. And so you think, well, they should be able to fill any holes that might be left by buying talent for their roster, because they have, this FedEx NIL money that most people in our conference don't have.
I think a lot of my problems with Ryan Silverfield is the fact that I don't think he has that coaching moxie.
Right.
And I think that he's not great at spotting talent. So you can have all that money to get it, but if you're only getting guys that are looking for that top dollar and maybe have coming from some P5 or P4 teams, yeah, it's going to look good on paper, but it's the product on the field and
kind of getting them all to work together as a
Yeah.
team that just doesn't seem to work.
But I think this is my conundrum here with Silverfield as opposed to Traylor. Traylor drives us nuts because he does usually get the most out of his players. I mean, I think we can safely
Sure.
say that. With Silverfield, it just, like I said before in the preview last week, it just never feels like he ever does. And I think that that's the problem, is that while Traylor can elevate a program like UTSA, Silverfield has not been able to elevate Memphis. And as we're going to start discussing right now about that nasty 3-letter word, NIL, if you can't elevate, then it doesn't matter how many NIL dollars you have.
Right.
It doesn't matter who you can bring in. There's just no way that you're going to be the success that I think the fan base thinks that they can get. And this Memphis Tigers fan base, I think they know that he's not the guy. And so I wonder, moving forward, is how long does he stay in the job?
Right.
He's going to have a good record based from last year and then this season. But it feels empty because you're not really making runs at the conference title. And
Right.
that helps you springboard into, a college playoff spot or something else in the offseason. And it just feels like wasted money to me. Like,
Right.
You've got all of this, and you struggle after Demir Blankensee celebrates his little Cristiano Ronaldo kind of hop in the end zone, and all of a sudden it falls apart. Like,
Right.
you can't scheme something for these other players. You don't have Seth Hennigan like step up, and I'll go in on Seth Hennigan probably a little while later when we get to the defense, but it just surprises me. Like, and it surprises me that it didn't feel like there was a sort of a lack of depth in the wide receiver room. It seemed like that offensive line couldn't handle a UTSA defensive line that has been patched together a little bit after we've suffered some injuries there.
Mm-hmm.
But you see, feels like just talent after talent coming in for UTSA and performing, whereas you don't see the same thing with Memphis.
Right. And it's going to be interesting to see where Memphis goes from here because they're out of the college football playoff discussion. I don't know that they were ever truly in it, but
no, they weren't.
But if they were, they're gone. They're out of it now with 2 losses. And depending on what happens in the rest of the conference, they may be out of the conference championship discussion. So are they going to be able to rally and continue, or are they going to fall apart? I mean, they're playing Rice next week, which we'll talk a little bit about, the upset that Rice had. But, if you kind of start to falter and it snowballs, then you could go from what could have been a 10-win season to staying at 7 wins, and ending up 7-5 or something.
Right. Well, let's get to UTSA, and because of speaking of snowballing, we thought that this would potentially the Tulsa loss last week was going to snowball into something worse for UTSA.
Sure.
Right? I mean, it certainly felt like when we did our predictions that bleak times were ahead coming into this game, and I'm kicking myself because after we talked about all these things about Memphis, certainly as I watched the game unfold in the first half, there was a little bit of, okay, this is the Memphis I imagined would come in and just, kind of start smoking UTSA, but they can't seem to stop them, stop the Roadrunners. But then you get to the point where it's like, oh, wait a second, why aren't you guys taking over? And it's because UTSA played at a higher level than Memphis did. And I think I'm just confused by the team at times. I think we're both frustrated because we're not really sure what to make of the team, but I think it's encapsulated really well post-game by Jamal Ligon, right? When he was asked why the team plays better at home, and he responds, man, I wish I had the answer. I don't know. I wish we played like this all the time.
Yeah, I mean, we all do. We all wish you played like you were at home, because that's a frustrating part, because you see these games and there's talent, and it doesn't matter that there's been injuries and that, we're decimated in this area or that area. They're able to just come together and elevate each other. The coaching staff, Traylor, is able to elevate the team to have these great games. And now, again, it wasn't a perfect game. There were mistakes. We'll talk about all of that. But we played at a level we expected to see throughout the season. And it's just frustrating because that the team is that talented and they can play at this level. And then you start to think, well, why couldn't we play this way in the second half at Tulsa? Why didn't we play this way in 4 quarters at ECU and 4 quarters at Rice? It's the challenging piece and the frustrating piece about this season.
Absolutely. And that's why we both went in on the fact that we were frustrated with Traylor and not the players. Because I didn't ever feel like the players had lost any sort of fight or they weren't talented enough. And I just didn't buy any of this kind of trying to mask the fact that we had like some poor walk-on coming in off the bench. We didn't. We've got some talented guys.
Right.
And once the coaching staff puts them in that position to succeed, as you've mentioned already, then we get these moments. So I don't know. I mean, I felt like the offense started showing what it can be under Owen McCown.
Right.
Against, arguably a better defense than we have seen throughout this season. And I also felt like there was times that this defense was just so dominant that I go back and cringe because I'm like, there were so many missed opportunities, as you mentioned already too.
Right.
Because this defense is really very good.
Right.
So maybe that's the part that we're missing. The fact on the road, because they have less players that they're traveling, maybe they're not able to do as much as they would like. But that's got to be something, again, that the coaching staff has to fix, not necessarily the players. It's the coaching staff that has to put our players in position to succeed.
One other thing that, has come up with the away versus home, I think, is, that component of having the fan support. And, certainly when you go on the road, there are very few fans that travel with the team. This was probably the first home game where we really saw a smaller crowd and a very small student section. I'm sure that was probably due in part to the fact that we've been playing inconsistently and the fact that it was an 11 a.m. kickoff time. But even when you have smaller crowds in the dome, they can get really loud just based on that environment. And so I think that probably, helps to kind of get this team going and get them juiced. You just wish that more people were able or willing and able to travel with the team, and maybe that would make a difference. But in the past, we've had these discussions, and Trailers mentioned it before, we're going to have to make our own support system during COVID and during, when we travel. And it just doesn't seem like they've been quite as successful doing that this year as they have in the past.
Yeah, that's fair. And I mean, we could analyze as much as we wanted, why the student section was the way it was. I think it really comes down to the fact that there's, like you said, they've been so inconsistent that it's hard to draw anybody to go out to the Alamo Dome for anything.
And it's hard to get college kids to, get up that early and, maybe it'll be different, but it's going to be tough the next 2 weeks or the next 2 games because they're Friday night games. So, we haven't had as many fans on our Friday night games. But maybe we've created some momentum. So I guess we'll see.
I mean, we're on ESPN too. So
yeah.
That was, I mean, again, we were on one of the major networks, right? So it is something to, I think, have a positive for. And also the fact that, as you mentioned, technically it's the first win over a ranked opponent because Memphis was number 25 in the coaches poll. They weren't ranked in the AP poll. But to me, it felt hollow because nothing about Memphis seemed like they were actually a ranked team.
Right.
Even watching them play all season, I just haven't felt like this is a ranked team. It felt more like, they're close, but they just don't do X, right? Like this is what they can't do. So
I think just given the trajectory of the season though, man, I'll take it. Hang the banner, put it in the program. We beat a ranked team. Like we need a win, right? We need that momentum right now. So whatever it takes.
Put it next to the Frisco Bowl win, right?
That's right. We're going to hang up the Frisco Bowl banner and the beat a ranked team banner, whatever it takes, man.
Well, it's good that we have a bye week this coming week because hopefully it gets us, some time to recover. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we're going in beat up into the bye week. So hopefully we get some of these guys that were out potentially back sooner rather than later. And, it's going to be a big game against North Texas, right? And we still don't know which UTSA team will show up. So let's start talking about the special teams.
Yeah, so we saw Tate break the school record with a 54-yard field goal. So close to getting over a 60-yard field goal, but unfortunately he got iced and apparently once he gets iced, it gets in his head or something. I don't know. He's got to figure that piece out. But man, when he kicked it and just took that practice shot and made it, I was like, wow, this is going to be incredible.
Well, breaking the school record on back-to-back kicks, that would have been incredible. First of all, right? He's got a leg, and
for sure.
We both of us saw it when we went to practices. Both of us saw it, when we've seen him in the spring games. It's just been, does he get the opportunity to do this? And, kudos to Jeff Traylor and Zach Brown for putting him in a position to get this chance. I mean, they could have said, nah, you know what? We're going to go ahead and kneel it after he hits that 60-yarder. He didn't quite get that second one. He didn't get it as solidly as he did the first one.
Right.
And you could, at least I could hear it. And I was like, oh, that's not going to make it. Like the second one. But I think it was more for Memphis to put somebody back there to, honestly field the missed field goal and then be able to return it. And, say what you want, Will, but we were able to make sure that the Memphis returner didn't score.
Right.
But honestly, that could have been major had, because I mean, essentially you have your slowest guys out there. You've got blockers.
Right.
And the only guys that are really mobile are Kilhogan and Tate Sandell. So you're hoping that they don't get knocked off, because if they get blocked or knocked away from any sort of running lane, they're really the only resort to stopping that return man.
And I couldn't quite tell who actually was the one who tackled the Memphis returner on the second field goal, but it had to have been Cale Holgan because he was credited with a tackle.
Well, and Tate got there quick too. So
Yeah.
I think both of them kind of tag team on that. But it's good to see that they were able to at least be aware enough to get there quick and just cut this out before this turned into a catastrophe. But let's talk real quick about Chris Carpenter from a special teams perspective.
Yeah, I mean, he had 2 great punt returns, averaged 22 yards each, and really was able to help set us up for some good field position after those returns. He hasn't always had the opportunity to return punts this season. There's been a lot of times where he's fair caught them or, he's gotten leveled. So it was good to see him be able to get some yardage back this time.
Not hating on you, Chris, but yeah, you have been
taken
kind of
some
smacked.
big-
Yeah, you've been smacked a couple of times. But look, that one of those punt returns was huge because it had come after essentially a big punt by Memphis that got us into around the 15-yard line. And then they had to re-kick because Memphis was penalized more times than UTSA in this game. Another reason why Memphis is who they are, right? They played down to the competition. And they made a mistake, and then it was a much shorter punt, and Chris was able to get the return back to, I think, about around the 45 or so.
Right.
So huge change of field position and really helped out this UTSA offense. Now, Cale Hogan also continued to improve on his punting. He had 3 punts, averaging about 45.3 yards, along a 50. That 50-yard punt you could hear. Obviously, the crowd was sparse, so the kicks were really coming, reverberating through. But there was a nice big boom when he kicked it, and you knew that was going to take off. But seeing Cale have some success also is good. Obviously, most likely our punter for next season unless he decides to go somewhere else. But I think he's in a good spot to continue to grow. I think there's still more to that leg. I think he can continue to boom some more punts, and totally going to need him. But I do think before we finish with special teams, because while we've said all these good things, there is one play that really almost cost us.
Yeah, I mean, David Amador misplayed that onside kick. He really should have let the ball go, but he, tries to go for it. It was coming so quickly at him that it was really hard for him to try to, appropriately handle it, which is why I said he should probably just have let it go and let it bounce out. But, on the other hand, you can't fault him too much because this was his first game that he was playing this season. So, in some respects, you kind of wish maybe they would have had somebody else out on the field. It's like hard to put someone in that position their first game out in the season, but he probably was just, rusty, and I'm sure would love to have that play back.
I mean, it's a learning opportunity.
Fortunately, the second time they did the onside kick, things worked out.
More
better.
heads up. Yeah, definitely more heads up. But overall, I think good special teams. No penalties from special teams. We had been, clobbering the opposing punt returners.
Yeah.
So good to see that this wasn't the case this time. So let's get to our offense. Keys to victory. I said simply protect Owen, right? Because I wasn't sure where UTSA was going. I thought there might be an implosion here, that there's going to be some sort of problem. I mean, they did a good enough job and pass blocking that they were able to say that they didn't allow a sack. They did allow 6 quarterback hurries, but you'll take those as opposed to getting Owen clobbered at any point.
Certainly. I mean, I said in my preview we were going to need an offensive showing like we saw in the first half of the Tulsa game to be competitive, and that's pretty much what we got. I mean, 408 yards of total offense. I mean, we certainly can talk about some of the areas that we still would like to see some improvement in, but, when you specifically talk about Owen, he was 20 for 37, 280 yards, 4 touchdowns. I mean, that's now 2 games in a row where we've seen Owen with 4 touchdowns, which is really impressive for somebody so early in their career.
A lot of it has to do with the fact that, we just don't have the running game, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But the fact, to your point, that he's able to still be able to direct this offense with his arm being the main weapon. Early in his career, Frank Harris couldn't do that. So, at the very least, I think we're going to start seeing Owen, I think, continue to progress, find a way to, and I'm still waiting for it. And he did it a couple times where he took off on the ground and kind of harkened back a little bit to a Frank Harris scrambling. But you see both of them in their young careers and how they all of a sudden kind of evolved to where they ended up being. Frank Harris being a much better passer. Hopefully Owen's still going on that path of being a better scrambler, timely scrambler. But the fact that he continues to get a chance to throw some bombs, one to Chris Carpenter, right? And then really, I can't think of really anything in this game where I felt like, wow, he really got throttled.
Right.
Or there was, Memphis did something that really threw him off. I would honestly say that I think he just missed some throws. And because of it, maybe would have seen bigger numbers, but he still succeeded. And that was, I think, the biggest thing for me is that you still see a kid that's able to just overcome some of the adversity, even though I think that, honestly, I think if I was in that situation, I don't know that I would have been able to overcome some of those things. And
Right.
I think there's a lot of young quarterbacks that wouldn't be able to. So that led to him getting AAC honorable mention, Offensive Player of the Week. Honestly, he earned that. I know we usually talk about somebody deserving an award, but I think, to me, he earned it.
Yeah.
He earned that with his performance. He's earned it over the last couple of weeks, the way he's been playing. And I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of areas we'll talk about here that need a little bit of more fine tuning, but it's tough not to see this UTSA team and see their quarterback getting hot at the right time and coming down the stretch, some winnable games.
Right.
A lot like Frank Harris, a lot like Frank Harris in his early in his career when he was getting hot, and you could see, wow, these guys are just going to surge into a postseason berth, right? So a guy, though, that, has gotten some criticism, I think. And look, I'm not saying he's the best at his position, but Chris Carpenter has come in clutch. And we had talked about the fact that he had a connection with Owen. But can we talk real quick about just some of the plays he's been able to make?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of interesting because, again, at the beginning of the season, we certainly didn't think that Chris Carpenter was going to be the guy in the wide receiver room. We would have expected that to be more Devin McEwen. But based on, circumstances and injuries, Chris Carpenter has had to become the guy. I mean, even Jeff Traylor said in one of his interviews this week, that wasn't the plan. Chris Carpenter was not expected to be, the number one wide receiver. But the great thing is, we've needed him to step up. He's a senior, he's a single digit, and he has stepped into that role. He's also kind of doing triple duty. He's our kick returner, he's our punt returner, he's our wide receiver. I mean, he's kind of doing it all right now. And, you can't fault him for having a drop pass here or there. But, when we needed those big plays, he's come through. You talked about that 60-yard bomb that he caught from Owen McCown. It set us up for a touchdown. That was really an important play at that time to keep us, moving forward in the game and to continue with momentum. And there have been a number of different plays like that from Chris Carpenter. And so it's really great to see him come into his own, and to see him really become that leader that you would expect a single digit guy, to do.
I kind of cringed when Traylor made that comment about, he's like, that wasn't the plan, because he again, there was sort of a backhanded compliment
Right.
at one point to it. But I would counter to Traylor, this is why we kept, again, giving you a hard time, because this was coaching too. This was certainly a belief in Chris Carpenter as well, that he could meet that moment. And I would certainly say that, for me, Chris Carpenter is probably going to be this underappreciated playmaker that we have this season, that when things got tough, Chris Carpenter was still there. And, there's a lot of things that you can count on, a lot of things you can't count on, but Chris made it work no matter what. No matter what, he was there for us when we had those tough moments. So That said, are we tight end university? These tight ends have really come into their own. I mean, obviously, some of it's because our wide receivers are banged up,
Right.
but I also think that Justin Burke has really done a good job of getting our tight ends downfield. And in doing so, he's really stretched out this offense and really put more of a downfield passing attack.
Hmm.
Now, they're not always going downfield, but man, when we're certainly on either our end of the field of play, there's certainly a lot of good tight end plays that Justin Burke draws up, and Owen's just hitting them. I mean, he's
Yeah.
making some really nice passes to these guys, and these guys are making the catches, which is the other thing to it.
Yeah.
But don't you feel like it's great to at least see the tight ends not just blocking?
Yeah. I mean, it's great to see them used in the receiving game. I mean, being a fan of Iowa State football, love watching tight ends in the receiving game. But I did have to chuckle a little bit when you talk about catching passes, because in the post game notes for UTSA, they made a point of saying that Houston Thomas caught all 6 of his targets for 44 yards and 2 touchdowns. And just the fact that they felt the need to say he caught all 6 of his targets, I just thought was a little humorous, because obviously it kind of speaks to the frustration we've had at times with drops in both tight ends and receivers. But, certainly it was a great performance by Houston Thomas. Between him and Patrick Overmeyer, you're really starting to see the future of the tight ends. Dan Dishman getting more involved and being healthy this year has also, been great, because before we relied heavily on Oscar Cardenas to be the one when we needed a tight end to step up and be the receiver, and he's out for the rest of the season. So I think it's really great to see the future. And again, we've harped a lot about the coaching staff putting the guys in the right position to succeed. And I think by utilizing the tight ends more in the receiving game, we've been able to put them and others in the right position to be successful.
I agree. I mean, I think, opposing defenses have had problems having to keep up with the tight ends, and that's why the tight ends have gotten open, because before you would keep them in to block, and it was almost a max protect, right? So you were just hoping that your wide receivers were able to get open so that
Right.
our quarterbacks could make plays. With this now, you've just got multiple receivers now out there. And Owen, as we've talked about many times before, is great at spreading the ball around.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about his connection with Chris Carpenter and Devin McEwen when he's playing, but he's not the kind of quarterback who's just going to look for those 2 guys.
Right.
He has in many of his games had 8 to 10 different receivers that he's thrown to. So he's much more effective at looking for multiple receivers. And I think Justin Burke's done a better job recently and, setting up plays that allow for different receivers to get involved, or tight ends.
That's the good part. The bad part is you'd think that with this downfield passing game that it was really kind of clicking too, because of the fact that our rushing game was going, but we only rushed for 101 yards in this game. The O-line, again, did well in pass protection, but just really struggles to get a push to support with the supporting running game. And we're now averaging 132.8 yards per game, which is the lowest average since 2018.
Back when we had Gorgeous Borges
Yeah,
as our
Al Borges.
offensive coordinator.
Yeah, those were the days. But I mean, that's the thing, is that it's just however you want to see it. I mean, I think a lot of it's got to do with the offensive line. That's the problem. But not being able to get very much push just makes what the tight ends, with the wide receivers, and what Owen have done much more incredible, because normally you wouldn't have this great of a passing attack unless you were just specifically going to be an air raid attack.
Right.
And we're not set up to be an air raid attack, but it's getting done because of the fact that you really can't run the ball.
Yeah. I mean, when you see, again, Owen as the leading rusher with 5 carries, 28 yards, certainly that's it's not a good sign for our run game. Although I was glad to see that Owen, was rushing more frequently in this game. Like, he kind of abandoned that a little bit in the Tulsa game, but it seemed like, he was making the right decisions, making them quicker. And I think that's part of his growth, is that he's able to identify quicker when he should just tuck it and run versus, before when it seemed like he was a little more indecisive and then starting the run a little too late.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now, one last thing I think I want to talk about is just that trick play that we had. It was a double pass, Owen to Amador, and then Amador to Dan Dishman. That had "this is going to fall apart" written all over it because Owen's pass out to Amador was high. Amador was, luckily enough, was able to go up and get it, and then was able to step into the throw and essentially get it over to Dan Dishman. The thing is that, the more I look at it at times, it's just, why are we going for the trick plays and like crucial moments? Like, I get it. I get why you want to do them, but
right.
This is the frustration of, I think, overall of when it comes to UTSA, because it feels like the trick play moments come at times when, is this really the right time to be making that call?
Well, and again, we talked about the fact that this is Amador's first game back, and he has the mistake in special teams, but it's like, here again, you're going to put him back in the game and then you're going to put a double pass on him. I mean, that's a lot of pressure in any game situation, but your first game, against a ranked Memphis team that, even though they're not great, they're still, probably the best competition we've seen in conference so far. Fortunately it worked out, but I don't know that I would have wanted to put, Amador in that position his first game in.
Agreed. All right, well, let's get to the defense. Keys to victory were stayed disciplined throughout the game. We'd seen them make so many bad penalties. We see it again. 3 penalties in the first half, which all led to Memphis first downs. But
only 3 penalties in the first half and none in the second half.
Right. I don't know what got into them at halftime, but let's be clear here. Like, this penalty issue hasn't been solely on the defense.
Right.
It's just that it's been evident with them that they've committed more penalties that have led to first downs, extending drives for our opponents.
Mm-hmm.
And again, here I just mentioned there was 3 penalties. All of them led to a Memphis first down. Danye Taylor, as much as I like him as a player, here he is getting hit with the penalty of hitting the quarterback after he started a slide. I think this is back-to-back weeks that he does it. The problem is that he just continues to commit the penalty.
Right.
And at some point, yes, it's got to be corrected, but we're 75% into the season. Like,
and this is a super season,
yeah.
So it's unlikely that it's going to change.
But that's the frustrating part about this, is that this defense at times has been so dominant, but we have these silly penalties, and this is the undisciplined part that I think that Jeff Traylor doesn't really focus on. Like, when we say the team is undisciplined, these are the moments that we're looking at and identifying as, why are they continuing to happen? And he seems to at times just kind of say, well, you know what? The refs didn't call it on Memphis, but they called it on us. It doesn't matter. You got to focus, control the controllables. That's what he always says, right? Control Danye. Figure out how to coach that out of him. Because if you can coach that out of him, we're not going to have any problems, right? But why are we handing them easy first downs? Like, that should just never happen. That said, 19th consecutive game with a takeaway and a sack.
Yeah, which is just incredibly impressive. I mean, especially since I feel like we spent a good portion of last season talking about how we were struggling to get a turnover, which obviously, knowing that this is the 19th game, it was only the first couple of games we had that conversation, but it felt like it was something we talked about over and over and over again last season. And, now here we are, 19 consecutive games. We have an interception by Jamarius Lewis, who, is a guy who was forced into playing in the Tulsa game because of an injury to Ken Robinson, really getting, his first start and playing time in this game. And he comes up clutch with an interception and then a forced fumble by Cyrus Dumas, who, was out last game, likely because of the suspension after the Rice game.
Yeah.
And comes back in and comes up again with a pivotal play.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing that you were talking about it. We were talking about it last season early on. Coincidentally enough, it started with Tennessee.
Right.
The one game that I wouldn't have thought that that's where it started. But when you go back and look at it, it's Tennessee that started this whole streak. So amazing. I think Cyrus had a great play in forcing that fumble and recovering it. Rock Taylor had been injured previously, and then this was, I think, his first series back, and then he makes that catch, and here we are back in business. Now, the only thing that we need to do a better job of as a team is when the defense commits all these turnovers is to turn them into points, and
Right.
we just did not do a very good job of that in this game. I said this defense was dominant. You're not going to think it's dominant when I give you these numbers. Gave up 36 points, 516 yards of total offense. 454 of that was passing. 62 of it was rushing. The reason I'm bringing up the 62 yards is for one reason. This is UTSA's best rush defense in its history. It's a short history, but in its history. And we're allowing 88.6 yards per game. 88.6 yards per game. Usually you did that when you're playing the video game NCAA football. You're able to completely stuff the run. But so it's amazing to see this, that we're in just double figures as opposed to triple figures. Currently, UTSA is ranked number 4 in the country. Number 4 in the country for rush defense.
It's impressive.
Kind of makes you feel a little bit interested to see how things go against Army, right?
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about stopping the run, man, we got to be on our A game in that game for sure.
Yeah. Well, we struggled in the first half. Like I said, we had those 3 penalties. We didn't seem to have an answer for Demir Blankham too, which we talked about. He ends up getting injured, and it seems like after that, Memphis lost their mojo. And that's where I, real quick, want to come back to Seth Hennigan. Said I was going to go in on him. Here's where I'm going to go in on him. UTSA, this UTSA team with a losing record, throttles you. Like, you're not able to move the ball against this team after Blankhamsey goes out.
Right.
This is where you expect Seth Hennigan to step up and not blink. Just go, oh, we got a different receiver. All right, it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about that with Owen, right? You don't see him just looking for Chris Carpenter or Devin McHugh when he's healthy or, one other receiver. You see him spreading the ball around. When Devin McEwen goes down, we see other guys come in. And like you said, he's not fazed by the fact that, he's got to throw to a different receiver. We saw that with Frank Harris in the past. Frank Harris definitely was going to look for Oscar and Josh, but there were times when, there were other receivers that he went to. So, you just expect that your senior quarterback is going to be able to overcome those challenges. And especially if your team really is a school that's in that college football playoff and AAC championship conversation.
Correct. And that's really what I think got me about this, is that you have to give credit to Jess Lepp. Jess Lepp saw something, made some adjustments, because there were 2 big stops on drives at the end of the second quarter on 4th down that this Memphis offensive line didn't move.
Yeah.
The UTSA defensive line completely throttled that offensive line and allowed for our linebackers to make plays. And because of it, that's how we make stops on 4th down. Like, there wasn't any push by that Memphis offensive line. And that to me is what's impressive. Like, for all Jeff Traylor talked about in terms of NIL money and how much we're behind, we've only lost 3 players in our history, and we still took a team that has way more NIL money. It tells you that NIL has nothing to do with it, right? It's about coaching. It's about the players. And our guys took care of business. So much so that this went into the second half. 7 of 9 possessions essentially result in a punt or turnover, and held Memphis scoreless in the third quarter, held them to 26 total yards of offense. And then in the fourth quarter, up until their last 2 drives, we had held Memphis to 45 total yards. That's 71 total yards up until those last two drives.
Yeah.
To me, I can make the case that Memphis took advantage of the garbage time.
Yeah.
It was 44-24. The game was out of reach for Memphis. It was clear. There was 2:45 left. There's really nothing else that was going to happen. And Seth Hennigan then took over Dak Prescott style. Oh, now they've released, not bringing pressure. And now they're kind of playing a little softer. all right, I will rack up my stats here. And that's
Right.
what he did. 125 total yards in those last 2 drives, all passing, and then 12 points. They missed an extra point and they failed a 2-point conversion. Look, I don't think there's much you could ask this defense to do. I think they met the moment. I know, like I said, they struggled in the first half, but they should have imploded after what happened at Tulsa in this
Right.
game, and they never did. And again, got to give credit to the team, all of the players, because they're the ones that made it happen. They were on the field. Also, got to give credit to the coaches. They had to get back out of their feelings and had to have, seen something against Memphis that got them to a point where they could stop this, Memphis from blowing us out. So I don't know. I was really impressed with what the defensive effort. I
Right.
thought, even though we had some cornerbacks, I mean, we did return Cyrus, but Davin Martin played well on the opposite side from Cyrus. You saw our defensive line living in the backfield. You saw our linebackers making big plays. So take out all of those 36 points and the 516 total yards of offense, and just look at what kind of masterpiece they put together in the middle of the game.
Right.
That I think really turned the tide for UTSA.
Mm-hmm.
So much so that Martavius French, who really I thought played a great game, ends up with AAC Defensive Player of the Week, 10 tackles, 5 solo tackles, 2 tackles for loss. I could say that he played pretty much a flawless game, but I think you're going to bring up one little thing.
Yeah, and it's not so much about talking about Martavius in particular. It's just, it was kind of the irony of the fact that you had called out Memphis in the North Texas game for, instead of trying to just bat down the ball in the end zone, one of their defenders going for the interception and then misplaying it, and that led to North Texas catching the ball, and it extended, the North Texas play and made it harder for Memphis then to win that game. And I just thought it was ironic that, you saw a similar play happen, with us, where I don't remember who the original defender was, but he bats down the ball like you would expect him to. But Martavius kind of comes in under him to try to make that game-winning, game-clutching interception, and unfortunately kind of bounces it up, and then Memphis receiver is able to catch it and make a touchdown. So it was just frustrating. And again, I'm sure it's not to take anything away from Martavius. It's just more of, when I saw the play, I thought, you just spoke about not to do that, in the preview. I was like, did you speak it into existence? I don't know.
Not at all, but I mean, that was more of a fluke play, I think.
Yeah,
Obviously,
certainly.
like you described it, Mario Anderson was in the right place at the right time. He was there where Martavius could pop the ball right into his hands. So I wouldn't take too much out of it. I think, like I said, fluke play, but overall clean game, I think, from Martavius. Obviously some areas for the defense, the offense, and special teams to clean up, but hard to argue that this was a really good win by all 3 facets of the game.
Absolutely.
All right, before we go, let's talk UTSA women's soccer. Yes, they won their last game of the season. They beat FAU at home 2-1. It was a comeback win. FAU went up 1-0 about the 54th minute of the game, and then UTSA struck back. It looked like we were gonna salvage it. Looked like we had a chance at the conference tournament, but unfortunately, Memphis didn't hold up their bargain. Thanks a lot, Memphis. And Tulsa is also going to become one of our rivals now, because of the fact that they just seem to be stopping UTSA. They won in tennis, knocking off UTSA. They came back and beat us in football. They beat us in soccer earlier in the year, and then end up getting into the tournament because of it.
Right.
I don't know what it is about Tulsa right now in the season, but so far they've had our number.
Yeah, I did not foresee that by any means, but yeah, I think Tulsa might be up there with one of the more hated teams for UTSA fans.
I don't think it's the fans. I think it's just more we just hate you because you're having some success for some
Right.
reason against us. But
Right.
anyway, end of the season 9th and just out of the conference tournament. Obviously, like I just alluded to, I think that Tulsa game was the reason why we are where we're at in 9th place. And
Yeah, and it's always frustrating when you don't control your own destiny, because you have this opportunity, you have to win, you fulfill your end of the bargain, and then you got to rely on somebody else to come through for you. And,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Memphis, I think they were in the position where they knew if they got a tie, even if they lost, they were still going to make it into the conference because they were one of the top seeds. They were going to play Tulsa again, and they end up, beating Tulsa, what,
They beat them 4-2
4
in
to
the
2,
tournament.
yeah, in the tournament.
Yeah.
So they didn't really have a whole lot of motivation to come in there and just beat up on Tulsa, but you still kind of wish they would have, so that we could have gotten into the tournament instead. But that's the things you face when you don't control your own destiny.
Right. And the season with the winning record 8-7-3. Obviously we're gonna miss the seniors. There was a lot of heartbroken players
Yeah.
after the game.
I think that was the most frustrating part was, you see this elation. They run on the field. They're so excited. They came from behind. They beat FAU. And then it's like 10 seconds later when they realize that, the Memphis Tulsa game's already happened and that it ended in a tie, and that's not going to be enough to get them into the tournament. And they went from elation to tears in like a heartbeat. It was just, it was really sad to watch.
Yeah, and we were watching. We were there at the game, and we were watching Derek Pittman. And honestly, he had one of his assistants watching the Tulsa Memphis game, and yeah, he let out an audible explicative when he heard the Tulsa had tied it up with like 5 or 6 minutes left in that game. So, but he clearly didn't tell the team what was going on. And,
Right.
and I'm
Until
glad
after,
I'm glad he didn't, because that could have been a big letdown from UTSA. Instead, they just kept motoring forward, and they got the win, which is very important.
Yeah, I know, it's hard for them because I know they're disappointed that they didn't make it into the conference championship or into the conference tournament. But at the end of the day, they had a winning record, which, it's hard to look back at the season and be frustrated by that.
Fair point. End of the year accolades, we get Sasha Day named the all-conference third team. She scored the second most goals this season with 3, and helped the team achieve the third best goals against average in the conference at 0.833. She was also AAC honorable mention for the week for the FAU game, because she did score the winning goal on a header against FAU. Addie Johnson named to all-conference freshman team. She led the team in scoring with 4 goals and shot 714 this season. Certainly some building blocks here, like Addie Johnson. Good to see her make an impact. But certainly some things that are going to be question marks to the future, right? So let's talk real quick about the future. Derek Pittman is going into his last year of his contract, so it should be interesting to see if there's going to be an extension signed during the offseason. I don't expect it anytime soon, but here in this offseason, the next few months, I would imagine there might be news that Derek Pittman is signed to an extension. But it would be interesting if Dr. Campos decides to wait on it, because then that signals to me that she wants to see something different out of the performance from Derek Pittman. And I would hate that going in, because then he becomes sort of a lame duck coach, and you don't want that. It doesn't matter what sport you're in. You don't want that sort of lame duck coach going into their last season on their contract, because that normally doesn't end up well.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the future, because next year we'll be talking about revenue sharing for different sports, and UTSA has said that they'll participate in revenue sharing, and that's already starting to have kind of a trickle down effect from some of these other larger programs, because in order for them to revenue share at the P4 level with some of their football programs, you're seeing them make some changes in their Olympic sports, and soccer being one of those sports that has started to see less scholarships and some other impacts with, commitments that had been made, and now they're coming back and saying, hey, we don't have a scholarship for you. So, it will be interesting to see if we have some additional talent pipelines that open up for UTSA, like maybe some of these girls that we're expecting to play at the P4 level, or we're expecting to have another year of a scholarship, might be more willing to come to UTSA, and that might help us to increase our talent and, to be more successful next year and get over that hump and make it into the conference tournament.
Yeah, it's a fair point. And I think just looking forward for the team, I would like to see the team focus more on possession and off-ball movement. I think that they've been at their best when that's the case, and they've really been at their best against even teams of their talent or below their talent level. I think they need to continue to grow in those areas because I think that's where they struggle the most against teams that are better than them. They're not able to control the ball as much, and they end up still staying in the games, and it does look good, but they don't create those chances that they could have if they're able to, do some of these just, I'll say basic things, but it's really just kind of strategies that most of these teams are partaking in. And in watching a lot of the AAC tournament, I saw most of the tournament. I've also seen a lot of these AAC games. I don't see UTSA being far off.
Right.
I don't see that we're just really struggling to compete. I think the thing is these little things like possession and the off-ball movement, those little things can be the difference and could help. The margins are pretty narrow. Like, you cannot make too many mistakes.
Right.
And, unfortunately we have made those mistakes and we've gotten beat because of it. But I feel like we can go ahead and turn the table on that and actually create chances of our own. And I don't think that we've been as consistent there. And because of it, it's just an opportunity for us moving forward in the AAC. I would also like to see, I think, some players come in from Derek Pittman, and this is what I think, my crystal ball of what I think is going to happen. I think he's going to we got some good young forwards, but I think he's also going to bring in somebody else, whether it's somebody via the portal or high school. You kind of mentioned already revenue sharing, so would be good to bring in a veteran. I'd also like to see some midfielders with good ball control, at least a couple of them, because I think that that's what this team needs. We are losing some midfielders, and we need the ball control and playmaking skills because we're losing Olivia Alvarez, who was really good and kind of dependent on playmaking from the wing position. Normally not where you see the playmaker yet, but just need somebody to step in either in her position or being closer to the middle to be able to take care of some of that. Defensively, he may add another defender, but there's a lot of defenders he has on the team.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of it's going to come down to whether or not Haley Lopez really does come back or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Isabel Peters is a good freshman that started for us last year near the end of the season when injuries started to pile up. But I think that she's going to be good, and I think you could still add a couple more and be in a good spot. Again, it just depends if we end up having to essentially trim our roster down and kind of, keep it a little more smaller team. I would like to see a veteran goalkeeper added via the portal or a high school goalkeeper. Isabel Herod is moving on since she's out of eligibility, so it's just Jasmine Kessler, and we need somebody else. So I would think that he's going to bring at least two in, a veteran, and then just another young goalkeeper to start grooming and start getting ready to take over for Jasmine, and at least have that goalkeeper ready to play maybe in Jasmine's senior season.
Sure.
So interesting times on the pitch there. I think this team has got, like I said, it's got talent and they're not far off. It's just making sure that they play much more consistently and able to create more chances for themselves. I think there were times when they just kind of bogged down and because of it ended up out of the tournament. So we'll see how things go, and we'll certainly update as more information comes through.
In terms of other football teams in the AAC, we saw what could be arguably called the AAC upset of the season. Rice beat Navy 24-10. I mean, it almost feels like it's one of those our coach just got fired bounce back effect wins. You see that a lot. After a coach gets fired, all of a sudden the team kind of rallies. You also had this odd weather delay, in the game. But man, I don't think anyone expected Rice to beat Navy, including Navy.
No, yeah. No, and I think a lot of it, I don't know that it's the coach just got fired bounce back effect. I think the weather delay affected both teams, and I think Rice was just up for it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think this is an anomaly, but we'll see. I mean, if Rice continues to kind of win and Navy just continues to spiral, then I think really you have to look at the fact that Navy got throttled
Yeah.
or got killed by Notre Dame, a week
The
ago.
week
So
before.
maybe they still haven't finished licking their wounds from that.
Sure. South Florida beat FAU 44-21. The interesting part about this game isn't necessarily what we saw in the field, it's what we saw after the game. There was kind of a chippy moment between Tom Herman and Alex Golesh where it looked like Alex Golesh kind of brushed off Tom Herman, and Tom Herman was just not having it. And you see him like kind of chirp at Alex Golesh and follow him. And for a hot second there, I thought we were going to see some kind of, old man scuffle on the field, that was likely going to be very humorous, but very disappointing. Fortunately, there was just kind of a well-timed player who walked in between the two of them. I don't think he even realized what was going on. And, they kind of pulled Tom Herman away. But yeah, that could have been another disappointing highlight of the season right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think they just got bad blood and,
Yeah.
rivals, right? Like
As rivalry goes, yeah. Number 21 Army beat Air Force 20-3. Surprisingly, without Bryson Daly, Army's now 8-0 for the first time since I think 1996. Not exactly sure when Bryson Daly will be able to come back and play again, but certainly puts a bit of a question mark on Army's future for the next couple of games. Without him, although they seem to do just fine against Air Force.
Well, they had their running back go off, and honestly, it was just more of a, I think, just kind of get through game. Just execute and let's just get through this game, and then let's make sure that Daly is back. Daly obviously is going to be a key component to them finishing the season out successfully. So we'll see how that all goes down. But I think Army is going to be fine down the line here. It'll be interesting though this coming week because they take on North Texas in Denton. So I don't know what result I want yet, whether it's Army losing or whether it's North Texas losing. Certainly I don't really want to see North Texas win, but because we wouldn't hear the end of it if they upset Army. So let's see how things go there. But it does look like we're certainly headed towards that Tulane versus Army matchup in the championship game for the AAC title. It's hard for me to see that either one of these teams, even if they stumble once down the line, are going to be in a position to not get to the championship game.
Yeah, the big question, like you mentioned for Army, it's going to be whether or not Bryson Daly comes back. I'm not so much worried about him coming back against North Texas. It's the following week when they play Notre Dame. And so, it may be a situation where Army makes it through, the last two games, because really the last two conference games they have are North Texas and UTSA. They should be fine to win both of those and make it to the championship. The question's going to be, if they're in a position then to potentially be in the college football playoffs, how is that Notre Dame game going to impact their chances?
Yeah, but it doesn't affect the AAC. So
Right.
To me, I don't care. I don't care if I don't think Army's making it to the college football playoffs is what I'm going to go with here. They're not going to make it because right now Boise State is head and shoulders above them. And I don't see that there's a way for Boise State to lose and still not make it to the college football playoffs. So it's just one of those seasons where this is just how things worked out.
All right. Well, I think that about wraps it up for us. Thanks for joining us on the Hail Mary podcast. I'm Atovs.
And I'm the Toves.
We'll be back soon to preview our game against North Texas.
Birds up.